Good afternoon, Maine. Welcome once again to the Muddy Waters Podcast. And I got to get in the right spot here. The Muddy Waters Podcast, as you all know at this point, exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state and to be able to highlight different candidates for different offices around the state and hear what they're about and why they're running. And so with the big gubernatorial race coming into focus for next year, we're blessed to have with us today the newest, I think, gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side to enter the race, Ben Midgley. Thanks for joining us.
Great job. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, happy to do it. This is one of the fun things about doing this podcast is I get to have conversations with all the people who are running on air and off air. Those are fun too. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to join. So mostly, I just want to give you the opportunity to share who you are and why you're running, as well as like kind of what your policy issues are. But so let's just kind of start with who are you, where do you come from, and yeah.
Sure. Okay. So my name's Ben Midgley. I'm 55 years old, and I grew up in the state. Grew up in Kennebunk, Maine. My wife is from Lyman, Maine. She grew up here as well. We have 3 kids, all of which who grew up in Maine, went to the same high school that I did, Kennebunk High School. One of them's still in high school, so we've definitely experienced, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, all of the changes in education, as our kids have been going through that, which has been pretty challenging, which is one of the reasons I'm running. But for me, I never graduated college. I tried to go to school, and back in the day, my parents gave me $500 and said, good luck. And then I went off to college, and I was working, which was a little surprise for me. I wasn't thinking that's how it was going to happen, but I ended up working 3 jobs to pay for the tuition and food and rent and all those things. And I lasted about 2 years. And one of the jobs that I had when I was out there trying to go through school was cleaning machines in a gym in exchange for a membership. So I was just, literally wiping down the equipment all day long while people were there, cleaning the bathrooms, whatever needed to be done. That was my job. And then I sort of kind of fell in love with the industry because I like to stay in shape, like to stay healthy. Everybody was really nice in that environment, because when people go to a gym, they're there to generally feel better, try and get some stress out or what have you, and just enjoy the environment. So I worked in that industry for about 6 or 7 years and was starting to climb up a little bit, and then ran into some hard times and ended up on unemployment, food stamps, for a while, a year and a half, almost maybe 2 years. Hard to remember, that was a while ago, but the food stamps back in the day were brightly colored tickets that you'd have to tear off in the grocery store aisle. I'm 55. I don't know how many people actually remember those now, but
I actually remember those because my family at one point when I was a kid, we were on food stamps and my mom had to pull those out. Yep.
Yeah. So, for me and my family at large was at food stamps for a while as well. But I was on it separately when I jumped out on my own. So that was when I decided I didn't want to be there anymore. And I kind of dug back into the industry, just tried to learn everything I could about what I was doing. And over 30 years in the fitness industry, I just continued to move up, and eventually I ended up becoming the president of a company called Planet Fitness, which was a large franchise company at that time. Grew that for a few years, and then left there and started another company called Crunch Fitness Franchising, which was with an older brand that was defunct and kind of went through bankruptcy. So wanted to revive that brand. And I was the chief executive officer and founding partner of that company. And over 15 years, grew that to the #1 fitness franchise in the U.S. and ranking-wise in the world. We had 500 facilities in 48 states, 3 million members, over $1 billion in revenue, and I created 15,000 jobs while building that company. So I know how to figure it out one way or another, create structure, momentum, and a very positive culture. That's really the most important thing I've found over my years in business, that if your culture is not right, people don't buy in, and you can't really achieve, something great if people aren't bought into the culture. And that has not been happening in our state for a very, very long time. And that, coupled with seeing the state just really go downhill in any number of subjects, I think I have about 22 different areas just looking at the state that needs some work. And I'm sure there's more. Obviously, there's some some primary issues that have to get fixed, right? And then if you're running a business or or a state, you always go after the ones that are causing the most pain, right, or have the most opportunity to be improved first, right, to kind of get things level set, and then you move on from there. But my family's ready for it. My wife's wonderful. Her name's Sonia. She's been great through this. The kids are at an age now where they can understand everything that's going on. I try not to talk too deep about politics with my 16-year-old, right? But just understand, so she understands, here's one side's view, here's this side's view, and you need to make up your own mind, right? And then I always encourage them to kind of really dig in there, because we don't want to be the parents to tell them this is how you think. And that's one of my strong beliefs on school too. Don't teach kids what to think, teach them how to think, right? And let kids figure out the right thing to do. So anyways, that's our primary motivations. And then what really spurred me on years ago was I'm in District 1, so we had a congressperson. It was Shelley Pingree. I wrote a letter to her because there was a Nissan plant in Biddeford. There was 500 people that were employed here. A lot of people probably don't even remember that. And those guys were going through a union fight with their corporate headquarters. And you could just tell, if you had a business background, that was not going to end well. It wasn't the corporation bluffing that they don't have money to make this work. And the union wasn't giving up their position. So I wrote to the congresswoman and said, hey, you guys got to get involved here. You're going to have 500 people, lose their jobs in Biddeford, which is one of the worst possible places in Maine at that time that you could have that many people losing their jobs. And I got back the most condescending reply that it was essentially unimportant to them. And then I said, you got to be kidding me. You got to get in there. You got to do something. You can fix this. You got to keep these jobs. And then I just got back another note that said, essentially, if there's nothing new, then we're going to consider this a closed matter. And that's where I kind of got beside myself. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's what government does. That's government. That's how we're taking care of people in Maine, one of the lowest income states in the country. We're just going to let all these people lose their jobs, and we're not going to follow up on, are they getting placed somewhere else? How's their family doing? None of that, Yeah. So that's what really got under my skin. And then, when the time was right, which for me is now, I've sold the company that I'm in along with the other partners, and my full and primary focus is helping Republicans win this race.
Well, your story is really great, obviously, and this because you've lived it, right? But it's a true American American story where you started with nothing essentially and worked your way up to see substantial success. Where you're the president and CEO of a company that, if I'm not mistaken, I think it sold for quite a bit of money. Obviously not all that went to you, but it was 1.5 billion was the sale price on that. Is that what I found?
Yeah, I can't still disclose the actual sale price, but
that's estimated by Wikipedia.
It's been out there.
Like that.
It's been out there.
Yeah. So it's a very a very successful business, and I think it's just really cool to see starting from nothing and working your way up, and so what it's like to be with nothing, as you've kind of said. So I think that's just really it's the American dream, right? And it can happen. It's one of the beauties of capitalism, that that somebody can start with basically nothing and work their way up and be successful. And so I think that's really cool. So. And you commented on your kids. I was at your what was it called? The day that you announced. Yeah, your announcement.
The announcement.
Well, I was at the announcement and the launch, but at the announcement,
and thank you for coming to both, by the way, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and I remember seeing your kids, and your kids seemed really proud to be there for you. They didn't seem like they were there because they were forced to be. Who knows? Maybe you coached them really well.
No, there's no forcing. But we talked about it for years. We talked about it a lot. So.
Yeah. So it's good to, it's good that they're obviously behind you in this. And obviously that's really, really important because you can't go it alone, and you need your support network, and your family's got to be that. So anyway, I just think that's really cool. So tell us what are obviously, I think you said that there are 22. Did you say 22 different things?
At least. Areas? I mean, they go down and you go down the list in terms of the biggest priorities to the smallest priorities. But there's a lot of dysfunction going on in the state right now. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think some of the ones that are just obviously people care about the most are things that affect people's ability to afford to live. Cost of living and so I think of energy costs are going up went up 36% year over year, which is apparently double the next highest state. And on top of that, that's not even incorporating in the fact that CMP just sent out their announcement that everybody's bills are going to go up 30. I think it's $25 or $35 per month, as like a flat thing for everybody. And so obviously energy costs are really high. Taxes are really high, property taxes in particular. I think those are, and then housing costs. Those are, when it comes to like the economy, those are probably three of the biggest factors. I think most people don't think about like, I think growing our economy by bringing in business, but that's another factor so, and obviously you've got more than just economics, but at the very least, as it relates to the economic policy, like what are your plans? How are you going to right the ship? Also feel free to go into other issues, but I feel like that's probably the most significant one. I mean, people care about social issues, but in my opinion, what drives elections is primarily my pocketbook. Do I feel like I have enough money to live, or do I feel like I'm struggling? And if I feel like I'm struggling, we want to get somebody else in there.
Sure. I guess first, let me say thank you on talking about my story, right? Because before you get into politics, at least me personally, I don't look at a story like mine as something people feel is maybe appropriate to have in government, right? But didn't graduate college and all that sort of stuff. You kind of think you've got a little something working against you, haven't been in politics before. But I'll tell you, when you've had nothing and you figure it out, and then you do get there, you have that much more of an appreciation for being in that position and what it takes to get up there. Right now we've got 30% of the state is on some sort of social welfare, right? Whether it's main care or food assistance or what have you. So, and it just simply doesn't need to be like that, right? It's getting to the point that the state's trying to get people almost 100% reliant on government support of some kind. And you just don't have enough taxpayers in the state to do that. So as we keep, making it harder and harder on people from the cost of living standpoint, and we'll cover every aspect you're talking about, and businesses are fleeing the state, you have to keep suppressing that tax burden onto everybody who's left. And it just doesn't work that way. You can't keep a functioning government like that. So we're in this path right now that if we don't turn this around on all those fundamental issues you're talking about, there's really going to be no way out of it, right? So this is a critical election for everybody. So for us, and I always try to use the words, I try not to use I, me, and my very often, right? I like to use we, us, and our, because that's how things happen, right? And then that also falls back on building culture, right? It's never about one person. It's about a group of people that get things to happen, right? And if you're lucky enough to be the one who becomes governor, what's really key is that you have smarter people surrounding you that run each of the different commissions, right? There's 15 different primary departments in government. You need the absolute best people in those departments doing things that need to be done for the people in the state. You see what I'm saying? So it's not very singular at all. But for us, our focus is the economy in Maine, the cost of living, obviously energy, housing, insurance, as other things, opportunities, more and better jobs, supporting law enforcement, crime, drugs. We're still in the top 10 of all states for drug overdoses and drug deaths. That's not by volume, it's per capita, right? Because we have very few people, but too many lives are getting just horribly affected by the way the state's approaching this. You were at our announcement speech. We lost our nephew to a drug overdose. A lot of families have been affected by that. So that has to stop. And educational improvement in the schools. And then subcategories below that are state spending and the budget. We've got more than enough revenue in the state right now. There's plenty of revenue. It's just you can't keep ratcheting up spending $1 billion a year. You got to pull that back in. So where you pull back those dollars are key, and how you do that. Main care is obviously the biggest driver of expense. I mean, if you look within the budget, right, there was a 57 line item budget submitted by Governor Mills, and 78.8% of that budget is in two departments. It's in the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. So that's where you're going to find your money right off the bat. The rest of the budget items are almost rounding errors because they're not that high. A couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there. I think the next biggest out of that might be the Attorney General's office, right? And they're just spending money suing Trump, which is a waste of taxpayers' money, right? So we'll fix that up too if we can get the right AG in there. And then you just have to have business-friendly policies, right? Without business-friendly policies and businesses succeeding at small, medium, and large sizes, you don't have the jobs. You can't fix any of this, right? So that's sort of the overview. But let's start with energy. You want to talk about energy first?
Absolutely, that would be great.
So energy spent a tremendous amount of time on energy, and we did meet with CNP, and we've met with virtually every energy expert we can find, and it's a total mess, right? It's an absolute total mess. The way they went about this is completely wrong. I don't know how many people know this, but I said it at the debate the other night. When the Democrats put this net energy billing into place in 2019, there is no limit at all to how many solar projects can go up in the state of Maine. There's nothing.
Yeah.
It can just go on and on forever. Right now, the state's getting 800 megawatts from solar, and we only need about 1,200 a day, right? One of the things that's happening, and not a lot of people are talking about it, is our grid is designed so energy comes into the state and then it goes out to all the homes. Since there's so many solar projects right now, there's so much energy coming back into these transformers that it's causing the switches inside the transformers that used to hit 12 times a day to hit 100 times a day. And they're breaking down. These are 50, 60, 70-year-old transformers. So, it's just not working properly anymore. So what's happening is the system's getting the grid itself is getting degraded. So not only are we paying to subsidize the stranded cost that's out there, which is about $200 million a year for the main ratepayers, not only are we paying 4 to 5 times as much for solar as we should, we're also paying to put this grid back together that is breaking down because of all these solar projects throwing energy back into the grids and having it come in from the top of a transformer out at the bottom where it's supposed to. And that's one of the main reasons CNP has to charge us. They owe their parent company $1 billion because all this was shoved down their necks by the Democrat legislatures. And they're using CNP, honestly, to look like the scapegoat. It's not a CNP problem. And look, I've never been a big CNP fan, and I told them that, right? I thought my bill was too high when it was like $100. Now it's $500. And everybody's got the same sort of story. So you got to repeal net energy billing. That has to go, right? Now, in that, there are legislative clauses. So meaning when they wrote this, these contracts say that you have to have sort of legislative approval to break these contracts, which means, as you know, and I know, that if you don't have a majority, not just the governor's office, but the House and the Senate, that makes it harder, right? Ideally, if we win the governor's office, we're also going to get the House, which I think is a high likelihood. Like we were talking off screen, the Senate's going to be a little tricky. It comes down to about 3 races. Hopefully we'll get there. We'll get the turnout, which is usually Republicans' challenge in midterm elections, but hopefully we're going to get the right amount of turnout. So if you can't get the majority and use the legislative clause to get these things out, then the governor's got to lean into it. You see, what hasn't been happening so far is the state has been just whitewashing the issue among voters, right? They use sound bites. This is beneficial electrification. I think Hannah Pingree likes to use that term, right? Climate, all that. I mean, with the amount of trees we have in the state, we do pretty good with carbon, right? We're almost like negative carbon contributor. But in any case, if the people in the state just know how bad it is and how much they're paying and the things that have happened to their electric bill that caused that to happen, just by putting a lot of, sunlight, no pun intended, on it, people are going to get pretty darn upset, right? So a governor can then lean on these contracts, and whether it's through public opinion or using the courts, because you're simply charging people too much, you have to negate these contracts or force renegotiate these contracts, right? You can't just look at them and say, oh, there's a legislative clause, we're not going to do anything about it. Whoever's a new governor, hopefully it's us, has to just lean hard and get this fixed. So you get rid of net energy billing, and then that's going to get rid of, or the majority of, the public policy charge, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is costing businesses, right, a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And if they have to spend that money, they're hiring less people. But once you get rid of that, they hire more people. Those people get more pay. They spend in the economy. Taxes go up. You've got to repeal the hydro cap, which was put in place in the King administration, 100 megawatts of hydroelectricity. That never should have happened. He was just trying to promote the wind industry back then, by the way, which he was in, right, at that point in time.
Right.
So if we didn't have that hydro cap, you'd be getting all this low-priced, renewable green energy today. This wouldn't even be an issue. I was talking to former governor of New Hampshire, fantastic guy, Sununu, a while back. He was telling me about their energy expense. They have one of the lowest increases in energy pricing in the country because they buy from a portfolio that doesn't require renewable energies, which is why our standard offer is so high. And they also get hydro energy, very inexpensive. And then they just passed a bill that's deregulating. I don't know if you saw this one. Anybody who wants to go out and just generate electricity on their own, as long as they don't attach to the grid. So you're going to have all these entrepreneurial businesses going in there and starting, electricity generation, locally, right, or for their own business or what have you. But that's going to be a really great thing for the state of New Hampshire. So we've got to get rid of the standard offer too. It's high because we're forced to buy from a portfolio of renewable energy. So you got to change those standards. That's in statute, but you get that changed. You got to reappoint the PUC because we've got a chairman of the PUC who used to run the Democratic Party, and the bow tie guy, right? And then you got to get the commissioners around them to get that properly structured. So you're not just there to approve rate increases, which is all PUC is doing right now. And then you've got to get the public advocate to be 100% consumer friendly. You got to make sure there are no restrictions on fossil fuels usage, storage, or transportation. And you got about 300 bills that has to be gone through that have all been put in place to try to, jam up the works for, fossil fuel energy in the state and a conversion to green energy. So you got to get that done. Small nuclear is going to be important. A lot of people are talking about it, but it's 5.5 years just to build one of those. So that's going to take a little while. And then you've got a lot of folks in the state, especially the older generation that has some bad memories of Maine Yankee, and they can be a very vocal group. So you got to get through that. There's going to be a little public work doing, but I think that's certainly part of the solution. And then, beyond that, you just got to lean hard on this one. This is a initiative that's going to require a lot of backbone, a lot of structure, not a lot of talking, a lot of action. And that's what's going to bring the most relief, I think, to people's pocketbooks right now is energy. And then we can talk about taxes next if you want to talk about taxes. But
yeah, we can get into taxes, but I think it's worth noting, and I agree. I agree that this is probably energy is probably one of the biggest issues on the expense side. The other one probably taxes is there, but like health insurance, probably health care and health insurance, the combination of those two things probably might be a bit higher than even like property taxes and taxes in general. But like in terms of like I think my understanding is, and you being a former business owner, maybe you're still a business owner, but different business maybe. I don't know. But understand that like one of the most significant detractors from outside investment coming to the state is not only the tax environment that's there, but I think is the energy piece. I think that's probably that trumps the tax situation, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, there's a lot of problems. You mean for businesses to come to the state?
Yeah.
There's a number of issues. I mean, you've got energy, obviously, right? Because if you're forecasting out your expenses to come run in the state versus other states, and you're paying double the cost of energy that you could pay in Texas or something like that, that's a big prohibitor. In that, I mean, it's hard to build in the state, right? Just to get your permits to do that. You've got these zoning rules and land use rules. It could take a year to get through the DEP in terms of your plans. Far too many regulations. This FMLA is going to be an absolute disaster for people, once it goes out. There isn't a single business that I've talked to, and I've talked to 38, 39 industries. That's not individual businesses. That's just different industries. Every one of them is off their rocker over FMLA and the way it's structured. And you've got people who want to, take their unplanned family emergency leave as soon as this program starts. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not really designed for that. You got to pay people at 90% rather than 60%. There's so many things wrong with that. Corporate tax rates are high, higher than New Hampshire, which is one of the best states in the country to do business. In the CNBC rankings, it's it's about 8.95% for any business over $3.5 million. They're trying to raise that to 10. They've got a bill in place now for a 4% increase in capital gains. I don't know if anybody's brought that up yet, but if that goes through, now you're just telling businesses it's going to be way too expensive for you to sell your business as well. So that's going to keep people away. So you've got too many regulations, too hard to build. Energy's a problem, too many taxes, right? And then on the other side, the state's not even doing much to support our primary industries, right? We've got some legacy industries in the state that need to be supported, right? Lobstermen, fishermen, they're getting beat up all the time. Logging, the tourism industry isn't being supported as well as it should with all these minimum wage increases. And agriculture doesn't have it easy, and then they also have some challenges with Canada, right? And what's allowed to come in and not come in. Talk to a lot of folks up in the northern part of the state. So that needs some work. Some of that's federal, that has to be involved in that too. But, if you have a Republican governor talking to a Republican administration, you're going to be able to get a lot more things done than having a Democratic governor like we already said, that's suing the administration time and time again. It's not the way to do it. The governor in any state needs to be the top salesperson for the state, right? Like I've been involved in the private equity world for a long time. There's tremendous investment that would love to come to the state. The governor needs to be the one selling the state and getting that investment into our state. You get big job producers coming into the state. They reinvest in the communities, right? They help, with a school tax base. You get all those people in the community more money in their pocket. They go out, they support local businesses, which are small size businesses, medium businesses. Tax revenue goes up. It's a win-win-win really for everybody all the way around. You've got to support innovation. I've talked to a lot of businesses that are doing some amazing things. There's this business, How and How, in Waterboro. I mean, military technology there would blow your mind. These guys are incredible. Matthew Brothers Windows, they're up there competing with the biggest window companies in the world. They're the oldest window manufacturer in the country, by the way. Robbins Lumber, the thing they're doing with pre-cutting everything. I mean, you can go around the state. There's some really tremendous innovation going on with Maine businesses, and the state can help with that too, right? You can encourage that, and you can provide different incentives for these businesses, both new or existing. And then of course small businesses cover what, 60% of the jobs in the state, right? So you got to make sure all across the line your policies and your procedures and your standard operating methods are there to support business, right? That doesn't mean you're hurting the working class. For some reason, the Democrats always think anything business is bad, right? If anything, you're supporting these folks and you're giving an opportunity to them to better their situation, which, by the way, we've got 25,000 open jobs in the state right now. We're 4 points lower in labor force participation compared to all states in the country, right? Because people aren't going to jump off their benefits and lose those benefits once they hit that cliff. And the cliff in the state is if you make too much money, you lose your benefits. So everything's kind of backwards right now, right? Let's hate business, right? Let's make everything too expensive for the consumer, and let's get people stuck on some sort of corporate welfare or state welfare. Sorry. So it's the formula doesn't work. So you just kind of start to dismantle those things and put in place policies and practices that will help each of those areas. And all of a sudden, and we haven't even talked about taxes yet because Maine's taxed way too high. We're one of the highest tax states in the country, with one of the lowest incomes. Then you let a little steam out of the system, a little pressure out of the system. People get their feet underneath them, take a breath. That's what you got to do first. And then you create the opportunity for everything to start moving in the right direction. So you got a little sort of stabilizing and then start to move up.
Yeah, absolutely. All that makes a lot of sense. And, again, especially the business stuff, the Democrats, they could never intentionally publicly look like they were going to seek to help businesses because somehow, as you said, they interpret their base, and it's kind of what they've preached as well, interprets that as being anti-worker, but it's actually pro-worker. If businesses are
very
growing,
pro-worker,
then there are more jobs, there are better jobs, those jobs pay more money, et cetera, et cetera. There's more competition there's more opportunity for them to be able to leave this company and go to that company. It's absolutely ridiculous to believe that it's not good for the worker. A lot of the Democrat ideas, and I'll let you get into taxes, but I just feel like I want to say this. A lot of the Democrat ideas are really like, in a vacuum, right? Like not assuming that we live in the real world and they're going to have real world implications. They're like, wouldn't it be ideal if, and it's like, sure, but that's not possible, right? It's not, given the reality of human nature, and the fact that we're one state of 50 states and we have to compete with those other states. And so if we're doing things that makes it more difficult for businesses, they're obviously going to go somewhere else, as you kind of mentioned in New Hampshire. But yeah, so I'll let you kind of move on to the, to talk more about taxes as the next big thing in our economy here in Maine.
Well, I'll talk about probably the state budget in general with that too, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Standpoint. All right. So biggest issue, right? Took what, 200 years to get to $7 billion in spending. And then it only took 6 more years to get to 12 billion. I mean, what are you talking about there? Right. So the spending is the problem all the way around. The state's got plenty of revenue. The state's got record revenues, even though it's forecasted now to level out, but it's going to level out because there's no business growth, right? What else are you going to do besides see these forecasts level out? And that's why you're seeing all these ridiculous, look, people, I don't think they should smoke, but you keep raising the cigarette tax. You got Netflix, you got, hunting licenses, fishing licenses, the arborist license fees were increased, right? The state's trying to squeeze these tiny little bits of money out of everywhere they can. $5 million here, $6 million here, $8 million there on a $12 billion budget to fill a gap, right? And really the gap they're trying to fill is main care. But once those little sponge squeezes are done, they have nowhere else to go but to push these major tax increases down on people, right? And Governor Mills has been trying to say no broad-based tax increase, but she'll slip tax increases in different ways. But if she's on her way out next year and the Dems, keeping the majority, you can guarantee that those tax increases are coming. There's no way around it, right? So we gotta stop that. We already talked about the budget and the majority of it being 78.8% being in DHHS, Department of Education. Obviously, the biggest issue in DHHS is main care, right? You've got 30% of the state on main care, and then you've got this thing we talked about called the cliff, that if you make too much money, you lose your benefits, right? In order to change that, you need to get a federal waiver, which you could certainly get if you're a Republican governor going to a Republican administration. And then what you do, at least my position is, you create a bridge for folks. So folks can actually start to make a little bit more money and they don't lose all their benefits. But what they do is they start to pay in a little bit, right? Personally, I think I have to pay about $3,000 a month for health insurance. Maybe it's a little bit more than that. A lot of people in the state pay a lot of money for health insurance. Well, if you're on a state plan, let's say you've got to pay $50 a month when you start to make a little bit more money, right? Or then you pay $100 a month. Now people aren't afraid to take those 25,000 jobs that are just sitting out there that nobody's going to take, right? Because they're not worried everything's going to be taken out from underneath them. But as you make more money, you pay into the system. An example, if you had 50,000 people out of 430,000 people paying in $100 a month, that's $60 million off the budget, just like that. They're only trying to fill a $120 million gap, and that's very small. What if you're paying $200 a month or $300 a month? Now you're making 35, 40,000, 50,000, what have you? See what I'm saying? And then it just moves up. This is not a complicated thing to structure, especially if you have a business background. If you don't have a business background, and you're a Democrat, very complicated. Very complicated. How can we let people do better and keep their benefits until they don't need the state help anymore, right? That's the answer. So just set it up so people can move through and not worry about, oh, my kid's not going to be able to go to the dentist or something. You know what I mean? It's not that hard to do.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on the need to fix this ladder here or create more of a ladder system. But here's a question, because I feel like part of the reason that this hasn't happened in the past is because basically the only way that this could happen, I think the Democrats would want to create a ladder the other way. They would want to get more people on the system.
Right. More people on. You got to get people off. Yeah.
And so the question is would you because I've thought about this a little bit and I want to just see what you think about it, is to say that if for people who are currently on, we create this laddering system where if they make more money, they don't lose all their benefits. There's not that cliff, but at the same time that we don't let other people get on those lower rungs, if that makes sense. So in a way that you're not adding people, because if you just create that laddering system and then you're actually going to be expanding the number of people that have access to the system at some level. And it seems like that is something that I think Republicans would not love. We want to get people off it, but we don't want to get people on more on it. Does that make sense? Where
I don't know that
create the ladder.
I understand your point.
Yeah.
I don't know that it would happen that way, just because as you start to climb up. I mean, look, when they had the expansion, right? Because the expansion came with Obamacare when they was paying 90%, because the standard Medicaid reimbursement is 60-ish%, right? And the expansion coverage is 90%. So you've got an averaged out coverage of about 70% there. And 90,000 of the 120,000 people that switched over had private insurance before that. Okay. They just jumped on to the state program because it's cheaper. They just did an economic calculation, right? So the goal is to make it so you can make more money, but then the amount you're paying in becomes sufficient enough that you're going to be making the sensible decision to get off of it and go on to more of a corporate employer plan or something else, an individual plan, which you can get cheap plans on the marketplace right now, and then get off of the state rolls. Meanwhile, the state's taking in revenue. So part of it's a financial calculation to lower the budget, because right now they're under projecting what main care is going to hit going forward. And I think there's even been a slight reduction in main care just over the last, year or so, small, but some. And then federally, you're probably going to have a reduction in the reimbursement rates, which is not accounted for at all in the budget. So if that happens, we're going to get hammered. So you need a budget lowering mechanism in this system to make sure that Maine taxpayers don't have to bear the burden of it. Because if anything changes from a federal reimbursement level, you can guarantee the Democrats are going to say all the rest of us have to pay for it. See what I mean there, Chuck? So you got to,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, you know, obviously
Yeah,
you got to
yeah.
have work requirements, right? Work requirements are a no-brainer. I think the biggest push against work requirements, which by the way is not just work, it's either a training program or volunteering, is that at least the only argument I've heard and I've listened to all of them, is that the communication process in which people find out that they now have to do these things, sometimes they never find out, and those people then lose their benefits because they didn't know about the change. Well, just have a better communication process. You know, that's pretty simple to communicate with people, even if you have to go to their freaking door and knock on it, right? You've got lots of local volunteers in all the communities, and you can make sure people don't, you know, lose their benefits because they've got to go down and volunteer to, you know, the church or something.
If you're getting a bunch of benefits from the government, the least you can do is pay attention to your emails. And yeah, I think I don't think we should need to like physically call people. I think send them emails. It should be fine. Yeah. But anyway,
but you can fill that gap. You know what I mean? You can
exactly.
You can fill that gap. All right, so
there are ways
to handle
that.
A couple other things. Getting off of main care, you've got you got to go to zero-sum budgeting, at least from the payroll standpoint, right? Because in the state, everybody just gets their increases every year. Let's say it's 3%. They don't fill it. They get the money. They get the increase next year, and it's just this bottomless pit in many cases when you don't even need the money. And by the way, half the state employees aren't even working from the office still.
Right.
So you're paying all this rent that you don't even need to pay. Just get the folks back in the office, right? I'm not saying they're doing a bad job. They could just be doing a more efficient job, and we shouldn't be paying rent, you know, when people aren't in those buildings. So you got to do that. The tax rate right now is not good, and it's going to get higher, right? I mean, you're 5.8% at what is it, $23,000? I think it's 23 or 20. I mean, it's a higher rate for the lowest income folks in Maine than it is for somebody making $500,000 in Massachusetts. It's ridiculous. And our highest tax rate kicks in at I think it's $61,000. You're at 7.15%. It might be 63,000, something like that. And there's proposals on the table to, you know, drive that up even further, but you can't have that. One thing a lot of people, well, they don't think about too is the Treasury cash pool. I don't know if anybody's mentioned that. The Treasury cash pool is where the state holds all its money. You've got your general fund, your budget stabilization fund, your other sources of revenue, and there's still COVID money left in there. You got about $400 million too much money just sitting in there too. Right. And so you don't need this extra cash. That you can start reducing fees, you can have a tax reduction, and you can utilize this money. And, you know, I got to be honest, like I didn't find that out myself. I read a lot from this guy named Alec Porches, who's somebody we would definitely bring in as a commissioner of DAFs. He used to do it under Paul LePage. And I just like to give credit where credit's due. This guy's fantastic, young, go-getter, knows the numbers inside out. And whoever's going to win, you need to make sure your team's lined up and ready to go on day one, because process-wise, when you win in November, you've got 2 months to submit your budget. So you've got to go through thousands of lines of budget to see what's being spent efficiently and effectively, right? Understanding too in your budget that every dollar you take, there's somebody on the other end of that dollar, and every dollar you spend, there's somebody on the other end of that dollar. So as a Republican, you can't just go in and just like say, slash, I'm cutting spending, right? You got to do it the right way and the responsible way and make sure you know where all the money's going. Get rid of the programs that are inefficient, and then you have to propose your tax decreases right then. And you've got to forecast all that out, right? And then it goes up to the legislature, and then you got to negotiate that stuff out. But if you're going to get tax decreases in, you got to do it right off the bat. And the state right now makes 77% of its revenue through income tax and sales tax, 37% from sales tax, 40% from income tax. So if you're going to cut those numbers and start to move those down marginally, and you can't go from here to here right away, right? You've got to reduce the spending accordingly so you can reduce taxes, give some relief to people. In the meanwhile, you fire up economic activity, then all of a sudden, midterm, you're making some big switches, right? Because things have already changed around. And by the way, and sorry if I keep going on here, Chuck, you just got me all fired up, right?
Yeah.
The last two times we decreased taxes in 2011 and 2015, revenue dipped a tiny bit and it went up again. We over exceeded our revenue expectations with tax decreases, which is the same thing that happens nationally.
Yep.
But nobody can figure that one out, right? If you make more, you're going to spend more.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where sometimes I think reducing taxation could temporarily negatively impact tax revenues, but in the long term, it increases economic activity.
Only about a year. It's only like 1 year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the other thing that's a problem is Portland getting all the general assistance funds. They're getting 80% of the general assistance funds, and you got the rest of the states getting 20%. It's ridiculous.
86, according to Mark Dion,
86.
when he was on with
Yeah.
me. 86% actually goes to Portland. Yeah,
Unbelievable.
yeah, that's a huge
I
problem.
mean,
So
Jim Libby, by the way, who I like, I think Jim's a great guy. He was saying his district got like $6,000.
yeah,
Something ridiculous. That might not be the exact number, but it was pathetic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's wild how much money is spent on general assistance out of Portland, for sure. In general, in the state, we're spent most of it, but again, most of it's coming from Portland, and most of it's being spent on, I believe, non Maine residents. Well, I guess they come and live here, but like they weren't originally from here.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that's the
non-citizens,
other thing that's got to come out of the budget. You've got way too much money being spent on illegal migrants. In my estimation, it's hundreds of millions of dollars when you count housing and healthcare and food, and that's just completely, glossed over on the Democrat side. So throughout this process, that's got to be pressed very hard, because I think once people see that number, they're going to be shocked. And you can't do that to one of the lowest income states in the country. Shouldn't do it to any state, but we're one of only 6 states that provides that level of benefit.
Especially an older state like ours. And speaking of that, like what are so under taxation? There's also property taxes. Is there any ideas what you're going to do to kind of help lower property taxes so that older people aren't priced out of their homes or taxed out of their homes?
Yeah, I looked at this in detail actually, and what's interesting is, property taxes are more municipal, right? So it's a little trickier, but the state provides support to the municipalities in 2 different ways. One, the municipalities get 5% of the sales tax revenue that's shared by the state. So actually, before I even say that, first of all, property taxes are in a crisis situation. So it's got to be handled as a crisis situation, not let's figure this out over the next 4 or 8 years, right? You got to nip this one in the bud right away. So you can conditionalize that 5% that the municipalities are getting. So, Chuck, if you're XYZ municipality, if you want this money, you need to do X. You can't raise your taxes beyond this. Then the school supplement we're giving, which is technically portrayed as 55% of school budgets, which is not done that way, right? It's very unevenly spread out throughout the state, but
90% to Lewiston, basically nothing to Cape Elizabeth, for instance.
Right, exactly. So the big issue there is for folks, not only are they getting hit with these reevaluations, these property taxes are going up, but all these school budgets are going up too. So it's a double whammy to these folks in these towns. That's why you saw at least a dozen school budgets shot down, because people are tired of it. I live, in Kennebunkport, but because the taxes are lower here, but I grew up in Kennebunk. Kennebunk's a very liberal town. Kennebunk is the town that torpedoed our school budget twice in a row. So if that town is fed up with the taxes, that's saying something. That's a big deal to see that happen, because they got a reevaluation and a property tax increase. But then you can also conditionalize that 55% of the dollars that go to support the schools. Look, if you're going to get this money, you're not raising the taxes on people in town. That's the bottom line. So I think those are the 2, most direct ways you can go at it. I don't think that's been done before by anybody, but that's, I think, one of the things you get when you have outside thinking too. And then part of that's a negotiation. There's give and take, but you have to apply pressure on the municipalities not to raise taxes on people anymore at the property level. It's too much. It's too much. And then, not to mention, the property taxes also lean into the housing, issue, right? Not only is it too expensive to buy housing, and the interest rates are way too high right now, but you throw those property taxes on, a lot of young couples don't understand. Oh yeah, you're gonna have to pay $15,000 just to live there, from a tax standpoint.
Yeah, it's wild down here for sure. Yeah, my taxes keep going up, but I'm late to the game. But I finally applied for my homestead exemption, which I should have done years ago.
Oh, and that's another thing. The Democrats got rid of the senior tax stabilization act, and they got rid of the cap that municipalities can charge folks for their property taxes. That's 2 Democrat terrible policies that led to one of these issues too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to get rid of those. You got to repeal those.
Yep. 100%. So outside of taxation, because I know that you have some limited time, what are the other like major issues that you want to focus on? Obviously, in economics, we've got, again, taxes, energy are probably the top two. But outside
Mhm.
of, or again, given our limited time, what are the other like major issues?
Well,
Then I've got some like rapid
yeah,
fire, quick questions on
yeah.
some key issues that Mainers care about.
I mean, some of them kind of blend together, right? Because when you talk about the state budget, that encompasses, taxes, right? Taxation, both individual
Yep.
and corporate. Welfare reform is something that needs to happen, right? We talked about
Yep.
pulling back the benefits for illegal migrants, doing the bridge for main care. The cash benefit is you need to prosecute fraud in that. Folks are using these benefits in Las Vegas and tourist attractions in Disney World. Those aren't there for that reason. It wasn't a bad thing when Paul LePage had pictures on EBT cards, right? I mean,
Yep.
a lot of fraud went down when that happened too. That's really important. Housing is a tricky issue. I mean, you've got to just make it a little bit easier for these developers, right? We're 80,000 units behind. We're only building at half the national average. There's way too much red tape. I mean, you have to review a subdivision at the state. What does the
Yeah.
state do in reviewing a subdivision? You can do that locally, right? Too many costs and
Yep.
fees. And you just generally, and I'm speeding up a little bit here, you just generally have poor housing policies in Augusta. It's not like they really want to get to the end solution on this. One thing that's very personal to me, and you got to thank Bill Diamond, who passed away recently,
Yeah.
is Child Protective Services. I think it's the
Yeah.
number one moral issue in the state, right? 151, 152 kids have passed away in state protection. It's, especially if you're a parent, it's absolutely horrifying. And then the Democrats won't say anything about this, So I think whoever the new governor is, you have to make sure people understand the level of this situation, right? Because I think people are not going to stand for it. They're going to be disgusted. You got to create a culture of accountability in there. You have to take the Department of Child and Protective Services out of DHHS. It's too much of a bureaucracy right now, and put it under public safety, which would be a much
Mhm.
better department to have in there. And then you take the deputy director of the Department of Child Protective Services and you make them a retired or current law enforcement who has experience in child homicide and child abuse. And you hate to have to say that, but you need someone who understands
Yep.
exactly how this stuff happens. And they're the number two there. You generally have someone with social worker, expertise in charge of the department, because these are very complex situations, but you cannot allow what's happening there to continue to happen. And then you have to have a lot more training for these caseworkers, better pay. You got a better whistleblower protection. So if you're a doctor, who's contacting the state saying someone's at risk, or a teacher, or daycare provider, or a caregiver, these calls are going to be taken seriously. And you got to really prepare people for what they're going to see. A lot of these caseworkers come in very green and they see some pretty bad stuff, right? And then they burn out, and the whole thing just um, needs
Got
to
to
be
start.
fixed.
Yeah. Got to start with some heads rolling, I think.
Yeah, and then there's
At the top.
this one thing I hate to say, but I actually want to say it because it makes people really understand. We met with John Morris, they call him the chief. He's a former commissioner of public safety under Paul LePage for 8 years. Phenomenal guy. And he was explaining how most of these investigations take place at the state police crime lab, which is the primary crime lab of the state. And he said the people who are investigating these cases never forget are the screams,
Hmm.
because they see them on video, they hear them,
Yeah.
and then they have to live with that. And that just hit me so hard to hear
Yeah.
that, to think about these folks that have to do that, and just to think that this is happening to children in our state under state care has to stop.
Yep.
Yeah. So sorry, I get
Absolutely.
wound up about that one because
No,
as a parent, you can't have that. Obviously, the initiatives, the red flag initiative, you got to vote no on that. You got to vote yes for voter ID, right? That's very important.
Yep.
Boys and girls sports, you're at my announcement, right? That's just a
Yeah.
fairness, safety issue. It just shouldn't happen. Education, big problem, right? And you can talk about education for a long time. Our kids went to school and have been going to school through this entire change in process where they put academics on the back seat and then put social emotional learning up front, and just sort of tried to change the way everything's happening in the schools. I'm sure the teachers, after 4 years, just got back the right to restrain and remove students that were challenges in class that just happened. So that's a fail in what's called restorative justice, right? You can't work it that way. And once they started this restorative justice process, incidents in the classrooms actually shot up by quite
So
a
when
bit.
you
I think it was almost
let me just
30%.
make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah.
So they made it so teachers can now physically restrain.
Yes, they
That's
can restrain and
which is
remove.
a good thing, is what we're saying,
Right,
right?
because before
Right.
it took almost
Yeah.
4 months to get a challenged student out of a
Well,
class
yeah,
because of these
they had to
processes you had to go
clear the
through, right?
classroom. You've got the student who's acting out, and basically everybody else just gets out of the room and lets him have his fit, or him or her,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but now they can
So,
actually handle
right.
it, which is
And
great.
you want to
Right?
make sure all these kids have the proper support and resources, right? It doesn't mean they're bad kids. It just means there's a bad situation happening or they're in a bad
Yeah.
place. So you want to support these kids, but you don't change the entire school system and then take teachers away from teaching academics and have them teach the whole child, right? They're not counselors on everyone's individual life. That's not what they're trained to do. And I
Yeah.
support teachers quite a bit, but those changes, the curriculum changes, have been a lot for kids. And then also you got a lot of teachers making, political comments in the classroom. That stuff's got to be just taken out of class. You shouldn't have any politics in schools. Teach kids how to think, not what to think. But you
Yeah.
got to get into some detail because I know your audience wants answers, right? You got to change the commissioner of education. That has to happen. You have to modify the state board of education, right? They're involved in curriculum, certification, things like that. So you got to make sure the proper people are sitting on that. I'm not even sure you need that board. A lot of states don't have it. Maybe you get rid of it, but otherwise you've got to move that around. And then there's something called the Maine School Management Association that not a lot of people know about. That's a third party group. You got the Maine Superintendents Association under there, and you have the Maine School Board Association underneath there. And they also work with Drummond Wilson, which a lot of people, for good reason, are
Yeah.
not happy with the advice Drummond Wilson's giving to the schools. So the schools pay for that. So you can also conditionalize the money that the schools get from the state to say what you can and can't spend that money on. And then you've got to get kind of a wedge in there between what a lot of the things that this group is teaching to these other groups, and get some separation there, put some more sensible providers in there to support them the way they need to be supported. And then you start to slowly dismantle this process, because the challenge with the schools, and again, I'm a big teacher supporter, because child education support, we want good opportunity for these kids, good education. Maybe they get a career, maybe they stay in the state of Maine. That'd be wonderful. But you've got this huge bureaucracy, and before you can understand how to modify these things, you have to understand how they were built, right? So once you understand how they're built, you can understand how to then sort of take them apart a little bit and reset them. But until you understand how things are built, it's really hard to fix them.
Yeah, and I think tons of thoughts on education. I talk a lot about that on here, but I'm just going to go DEI.
Yeah, bad. I mean,
Okay.
look,
CRT.
Horrible. Yeah.
SEL.
Social emotional. I was just talking about that. Yeah. That doesn't work
right.
either.
Right. None of these things. I just think those are the fun ones.
Look, I'll just say diversity in general is not a bad thing. Do you know what I mean? By any means, you get all sorts of diversity of people and opinions. That's great, but don't just, the way it's being done is just terrible.
Well, it's the E and the I that are the problem. The equity, like equal outcomes, regardless of performance, right? No, we need to be a meritocracy, and inclusion is inclusion is really focused on forcing language and forcing you to agree with things that you don't agree with. So those two things are stupid. But diversity, I'm fine with, and I think most people who understand it rightly are. But yeah, no, I wanted to throw those out there real quick. I know you probably have limited time. We could probably fill up another hour talking about a bunch of.
Sure, we can do it again too. Happy to do it again too. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think ultimately, focusing the areas that you're talking about are the ones that I think are most important to most people. I do think that there are a couple other a transgender treatment of minors.
Well, that whole rule is terrible. I mean, the way the state can interfere with kids of parents outside the state, and law enforcement has to stand down, that should never be.
Yeah, and then. This is a more challenging one, but I just want to give you a brief opportunity to kind of, I think, because it is important to conservative voters, and I know we're in the state of Maine, so it's complicated. But the pro-life, pro-choice, where you fall, if that makes sense on that issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything's since the Supreme Court made this a state issue, right? Maine is, I don't think, ever going to be a state that turns pro-life. I I don't see it happening. I don't know if anybody out there does. I think
Yep.
the policy that's in place now is the most liberal in the country from an abortion standpoint. And prior to this, there was a law in 2019 that seemed to work for everybody. That was fine. If the state got back to that, I think that'd be a very reasonable place to be. It's just, you know, anything like this is going to end up on referendum, and the state's going to vote on it. And you know, that's essentially where I'm at. I just don't think if you're a Republican out there and you're trying to change the state to pro-life, that's someplace you're probably ever going to get.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I appreciate that. I mean, obviously, if you're looking to govern a state, you have to, you know, to some degree, you know, go with what the people want. And if you try to go outside of what the people want, whether it's right or wrong, you know, you're not going to be able to make any difference. So I appreciate where you're coming from there. So anyway, I know that we're kind of a little bit over your time limit. You probably got other things you got to get on to, but thank you for taking the time. Anything, any kind of final words, like why, we'll just say why should people vote for you over against all of the other candidates? What's the number one thing that you think sets you apart as being the best Republican
First,
candidate?
first, and at least the tone I'm setting with everybody, I like everybody that's running. I mean, they're all a good group of people, and you know, so far everybody seems to be, you know, sort of reciprocating that approach, and so I'm not probably the originator of that. You know, I think the goal for us is to win the election. That's the most important thing, right? If you don't win this time, we're going to be in a world of hurt. Literally, it's going to get bad for folks, right? Things are already bad because there's nowhere else they can go. So I think what's going to be important for everyone who's on the Republican side is make sure you put someone through the primary who can win in the general. That is the most important thing. We're outnumbered by 40,000 registered Democrats, give or take. So you've got a large block of independents that are going to really help sway this election. And then voter turnout, which you mentioned earlier, is always a tricky one, right? Republicans sometimes lack a little bit of energy, right? They're not the ones that always get on social media. They're not the ones that express their opinions. They're naturally independent thinkers, you know, as it is. But I think we really need to ratchet up the energy level here. We need to make sure we get the right person through in the primary who is palatable to the most possible people. And I know there's some Democrats out there that are very disenchanted too, especially business owners. They're not happy either. So I think we can actually do pretty well. Why I think I'm a better choice than everybody else is one, just given the size of the businesses I've run, you know, creating 15,000 jobs in the businesses I built, issues that may seem complex to other folks because you've got a big government to run, not just the issues that we're talking about. You've actually got to run things and make sure they function every day properly and ideally more efficiently, much more efficiently than they do. Things that seem complex to other people will not seem complex to me. Right. These are standard operating procedures in terms of how to run business, strategy, tactics, timings, and then you go after the big things that have to happen so we get the state, you know, on the right path going forward. But that being said, if anybody wins, that's a Republican, we're better off.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that, and we need to, as much as possible, not focus on attacking or eating our own, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate, So I appreciate that response. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back on here on Thursday. We've got Alicia. Oh gosh. Representative Alicia Collins is going to be coming on Thursday. So we'll see you back here then. Get more information about you, Ben, where are they going to find you? You're on X.
Thank you. Yeah, we're on X, we're on Facebook. Everything's basically benforgovernor.com, Ben for Governor on Facebook. Same. We got that one. We got that one locked up. And thank you very much for having me on, Chuck.